Gerald Moore. Welcome to the Karen Hunter Show.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. It's a pleasure to be on the show. I'm a fan, especially of the Saturday class. I try and catch the Saturday class all the time. Just signed up for Narrative, so I'm
Oh
ready to
man.
go. You
Okay.
guys
Well,
are enlightening me on so much. I feel so ignorant in regards to my African history, but thank you guys for holding that platform. And you guys hold that down, and I'll hold it down in tech.
well, we might have to incorporate what we do with what you do. And let me just, I'm not a doctor. I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who put that work in. And maybe one day I'll go back, but I don't know why I would not spend that money. It would have to be somebody would have to pay for it because I'm not spending money to go get somebody else's education. It's important that we have this discourse, right? And to feel ignorant, we all are, and this is the journey, right? Everybody is ignorant of something. And the goal is to fill in the gaps in the areas that you have passion. So your passion is tech. Take us through how you got into this space.
Well, today, Black male educators make up less than 2% of the high-tech and STEM workforce. Black males make up less than 5% of the high-tech and STEM workforce. And now I'm a part of that. And how I came up, young Black male from the inner city, Black boys from the inner city have their first police encounter at 12. I was one of those. I got expelled from school at 14. Black boys are most suspended than any other race of people from schools. I was one of those. At 15, I did the Scared Straight program in Rochester, New York. At 17, I had my first child. I had full custody of my son when he was 3 months old, a senior in high school. So I hit every major roadblock that they say Black boys are going to hit in their adolescence. But yet, at 24, I graduated from Norfolk State University with a degree in electronics engineering technology. And people ask me, well, how did I do it? Especially since I graduated high school with a 1.69 GPA.
Damn.
And, they said, how do I do it? Well, my high school GPA was not indicative of who I was as an individual or my talent in tech. I'll tell you a story. When I was 10 years old, I took the spanking of my life when I took apart a radio boombox my mother brought me. And you don't tear up something, allegedly tear up something a Black woman done spent her hard-earned money on. So my mother bought me this radio for my birthday. And when she came in my room, it was taken apart because in my mind, I needed to know how the dial worked on the radio. How did I turn this knob and it changed the station? I needed to know how the heads on the tape deck worked and how did this piece of tape let music come out? So I took that radio apart. Now, tech was something that was in me. So my mother tore my butt up. So when she came, so the next morning, I'm playing the radio, right? I'm playing the radio, getting myself ready for school. And she walks in my room, sees the radio all put back together and walks out. So I go out in the hall and my mother is in tears because she finally figured out this was who I was, because everything electronic I had to take it apart. I had to see what was in it. And she just thought I was tearing up stuff. But that tech and that ingenuity was in me to kind of figure out how things work. Now, growing up, I just grew up in a hood where you just had to be tough. You just had to be tough. So I kind of played out this role of the tough guy and fought because I had to fight. Didn't want to fight, but fought because I had to fight. I was also a good athlete, and school just never appealed to me. I never had a Black male educator until I got to college because I went to an HBCU held to Norfolk State University, who had an open enrollment policy at the time. And I was able to test into their engineering department. So I think, got to give a shout out to the HBCUs that's giving young brothers an opportunity to be successful. Another thing that happened when I got expelled from school in the 8th grade, and I got expelled for fighting at the end of the school year. So the beginning of my freshman year, it just so happened my expulsion meeting was the first meeting of the school year. And the superintendent happened to be in the meeting because it's the first expulsion meeting. So my mother, superintendent sitting at the table, and the administrators from my middle school are there. going through my rap sheet, and the superintendent stops the meeting. And he says, has anybody looked at Mr. Moore's New York State test record? And no one said anything. Well, he said, well, we don't kick kids out of school who are testing at 12th year, 10 month and reading math and science coming out of the 8th grade. He's virtually tested out of high school. So he allowed me to go to any school in the city that I wanted to go to. I chose a vocational school, Edison Tech, where I took 4 years of electronics there. Still, my other grades were terrible, but, took 4 years of electronics there. And one day when I had to do the Scared Straight program, it was done by, I had to go to the therapist. Let's talk through these anger issues, Mr. Moore, that you have. And the therapist asked me one day, she was like, you seem to be a bright student. Like, why can't you do better in school? I said, no one asked me what I wanted to learn. Had somebody asked me what I wanted to learn, I could have told you, and then we could have collaborated and I would have done better. But because that didn't happen, I was doing work outside of my own. And it just so happened by the time I was 15 years old, I was installing elaborate car audio systems for the drug dealers in my neighborhood, making money. So, so I just, in a roundabout way, that's how I had to go at it. And, having a son as a senior in high school, that kind of gave me more focus. And when I got to Norfolk State, I had Black men that were pouring into me that, allowed me to excel. I never made the honor roll until I got to college.
You know what's crazy about?
Oh, go ahead, Drew. I'm sorry.
What was amazing about listening to your story is that I think about how we just knee-jerk reaction stereotype young Black males. We do the same thing to young Black girls too. We say that they're fast, or that they're this, or that they're that, and we put these tropes and these stereotypes on young Black men. And I think sometimes it kills their curiosity. Right. If we don't recognize it, like, we might look at it and say, oh, they being bad, or maybe they just being curious, or maybe they just want to know how things work. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel like maybe the solve for that is that, where we don't always say, well, he can't pay attention in class. Maybe we're just not teaching him anything that he's interested in, right? What's the solve for that, and how we treat young Black men in particular in their adolescence and in their youth?
Well, I think my organization is resolution for that, Mission Fulfilled 2030. And what we do is we create programs for Black boys who may not ever have Black men in their lives to kind of help them explore that, where representation matters, right? We know that representation matters. Well, if Black men make up less than 2% of the public school workforce, they're not represented there. So where you and I can go up to some young brothers in school that's acting up and kind of stand next to them and they get right, well, the predominantly white women in their classrooms can't do that. They can't relate to that, right? And even, having Black women in the classrooms, Black boys are still gonna goof off a little bit. And just that representation of Black men in their lives actually makes a huge difference. Like, I was able, so much, my mother is the oldest of 9, and my mother had 6 brothers. My father's in the middle of 12, and my father has 7 brothers. Unfortunately, 100% of my mother's brothers and my father's brothers at some point struggled with drug and alcohol addiction. Now, my father, I call my father beautifully flawed. Mm-hmm. Now, he was probably, he was a working alcoholic, and later in his life dabbled in a little drugs, but he was brilliant. Never finished school, but was well educated. Grew up in Georgia, was able to come to New York where he met my mother, and he was able to get a trade. My father's parents died when he was 12. So he pretty much raised himself and always taught me to kind of have this ingenuity and toughness, and had this do as I say, not as I do type of thing that I went for, which is actually a flawed logic, because most young boys want to kind of be like their father. But what I realized coming up is that even in the flaws of all my uncles and my father, I was able to make it through and realize that, what Black boys need, whether they're flawed or not, they need men in their lives. Mm-hmm. Whether they're flawed or not, you have to have Black men around and in their lives. And I think that a lot of times what's happening in our Black families is Black men just get thrown away. And I think that's where the systems come in. And then when we look at tech, that's where the systems come in, because there's no Black men. And what happens, and I was a culprit to this, when Black men become successful, what do? We go move to a better community, and a lot of us disappear. But what I realized is once I became successful, I got to go back and give back. I got to be a face in these neighborhoods that I came up in. I got to be a face and show the Black boys that, hey, I grew up just like you. One of my best friends growing up was a drug dealer. He's now in jail. But, I grew up just like y'all. You have choices. There are other ways out. And what we're looking at now in the tech space, like we have this Young Tech Entrepreneurs Program. And when a young man is hungry in the city and you're telling him his only way out is through education, and you catch him at 12 and he's like, well, you telling me in 10 more years I can get paid? That logic is kind of flawed in his mind, because he's hungry now, right? He's hungry now. No telling what his mother is going through. No telling what his father is going through. All we know is that he goes home, he may not eat. Like, I'm in the DC metro area. They keep DC schools open because a lot of kids don't have food at home. So when you have that kid, how do you engage him? Well, in our Young Tech Entrepreneurs Program, we like, we teaching you tech to earn now. So what we do is we use open source tools. We use a tool like Canva, help them create a logo. Then we take a tool like T-Chip and help them to put it out in the marketplace. And if you ask most young kids, what do they want to do today? They'll say, I want to be a social media influencer. And we'll say, well, that's not a job. Well, it actually is a job, because kids are making millions of dollars doing it. So why not help them do it in a more business way and start their own tech company? So we call it our Damon John model. Put a logo on a shirt, put it on T-Chip, no cost, teach them how to market it on social media the right way, have a global landscape. You actually have your own tech company. And then we become their first customer. And what goes on in the mind when a kid sees that first $25 drop into his account, there's a mindset shift there. So you mean to tell me if I keep doing this on a consistent basis that I can earn a living? Yeah, and you have your own tech company. But what comes from that, it also gets competitive. Black boys are competitive. I want my site to be better than his. I want my company to be better than his. So then what do they come back to me? Coach Moore, well, I need to move this on my website. I need to move this on my app. Well, you need to learn how to code some CSS, maybe some PHP, or maybe some Python. So now I'm shifting me forcing education on them in tech to them wanting the education in tech, which bridges the gap in our communication, which is going to help a lot of young brothers in the future through our program.
Mission fulfilled, missionfulfilled2030.org. That shirt you're wearing, Gerald Moore is here, by the way. Is that one of the kids? Did one of the kids do that shirt? That a logo?
This is our corporate logo.
Okay. All right. Just checking.
This is our corporate logo, but we got some very talented kids we're going to start showcasing. We got a ton of programs, and kids are doing awesome stuff in our program. And what's awesome about our program is all our programs are led by Black men. We got Black men teaching Black boys.
I have, we started Tech Tuesday, which today is, because of an interview I did with Van Jones 5-6 years ago. When Prince was still alive, and he was talking about he and Prince collaborating to get, I think it was 1 million Black boys to learn how to code. And I thought that was such an important, valuable skill that these kids needed to learn, these young people needed to learn, because there was at that time, 1 million jobs unmanned in tech, right? So they were going to fill that. 1 million jobs unmanned in America. That's now 4 million unmanned. And with this pandemic and the previous president, we're not importing as many tech people. We need homegrown tech people. And if there's this lack of diversity, which you just mentioned, 2%, there's a lot of landscape there to fill in. We need a lot of our young people, but just telling them they need to code is not enough.
Right.
Showing them how, what you're doing, Gerald Moore, is the answer. And I just want to applaud you for that, because it is, somebody said to me, because yesterday we did a story about this new league for high school kids playing basketball, and they're going to pay them $100,000 a year. And I'm here for it. I'm here for a high school kid making $100,000 a year. And they were like, well, you're telling them not to get an education. I'm like, what are they learning? Right. They're not figuring out how to engage with our children, because they don't see our children.
Absolutely.
They see them as numbers and as stats, but they don't see them, because our kids may learn differently. Some are auditory, some are visual, but you got to connect with them at their soul to allow them to be able to see. They're brilliant, but if you don't know how to extract that brilliance, you just put them in the corner somewhere, stick them on some drugs, some Ritalin or whatever, and classify them.
And if people don't see that brilliance, it's not on the kid too. Like, it's on the teacher. Like, if your job is to tap into that brilliance and you don't, and you fail, that ain't on the kid. That's on you. You a whack teacher. You know what I'm saying? That's the part I think that's the disconnect.
But a huge part of it, when you say that, is culturally relevance, right? Like, I'm from the street where I grew up. You had 4 ways out. You had the NBA, you had the NFL, you had hip hop, and you had drugs. I was good at all of them besides the drugs, because my boys did that, right? I believe I heard Karen say this on one of her shows, that why can't you maximize all aspects of you? Why can't you be good at football, basketball? Like, I used to DJ for this rap group, and I thought that was my way out. Like, we was dope. Me and my boy, we was touring. When I was a freshman in college, I was touring. My claim to fame is we opened the show for the Fugees, right? But still, you know, I was embracing where I was from, and I was allowed to do that, to fully explore who I was. Now, what education is today is not culturally relevant. And the analogy I'll use for that is, our Generation Z kids have grown up with the internet. They've grown up with Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and all of these things, right? But those are not leveraged in the classroom. Right. So they're not helping to make the classroom culturally relevant. So our Gen Z kids are like MacBooks, right? And our teachers are trying to install PC software on floppy disk. It don't work. It's not going to work. Education has to be culturally relevant. Like, the analogies that I use while teaching tech, most teachers can't use, because they're not from the background that I'm from. They can't leverage sports analogies and hip hop analogies that go along with the technology that I'm teaching, which makes it relevant for the kids.
Culture in the classroom is one of the things I think is totally missing, man. Like, how do you define and kind of make sure that the people that you have who are sort of feeding into these young men and these guys, how do you find the right people to do that?
Well, I think the bureaucracy of the school system, you're not going to find that within the schools, right? So thus, I'm actually pitching the schools all day that you have to have after school programs or inclusionary programs like mine, where at least I'm connected with Black men all over the country that are in tech, right? That are willing to leverage themselves and give back. But the school systems make it so difficult to get programs in that it's just really hard. They're not going to be able to, you know, increase their programming. And think about this, right? 95% of our schools, if tech is the future, 95% of our schools don't have any computer scientists, engineers, or developers in their buildings. Yep. So how are we developing the kids of the future when we don't have the futurists who can teach that stuff in the schools? You can't send a teacher to a code.org seminar and then expect her to come back and teach it to the students and have any type of passion for it when they're still trying to learn it.
Yeah, it's crazy, man, because there's a school in Brooklyn called Pathways to Technology and Higher in education. It's a high school that's been adopted by a couple of tech companies. And it's the only time, and I've been in high schools all over Metro New York for the last 5 years talking about STEM and tech, and that you can have a job in STEM and not be a tech guy, which I've been working in tech and not. I work in comms in tech and marketing in tech. And that was the first time where students actually had the equipment that they would that they actually needed to be engaged. You know what I'm saying? And so I go back to this, like oftentimes if there are 2 or 3 black men in those public schools, those 2 or 3 black men end up being the police. They end up being the cop, right? They end up being the disciplinarian because those other folks don't know what to do with our kids or how to talk to them or how to get them to, to be respectful in class and all that kind of stuff. So even when there are black men in those environments, it still feels like there's not enough for us to be able to bring that cultural competency in to where we can embrace the kids as opposed to always policing.